So fellas, since we've got two massive title fights this week with Islam Makhachev taking on Tsarukyan in a rematch and Morab taking on Umar and Merab, I thought I'd do a complete skills breakdown between Islam Makhachev and Tsarukyan and Morab and Umar and Merab to kind of see who's better when we look at certain skills. So we're going to be comparing the striking, comparing the grappling, looking at a bunch of different attributes between the two of them, or the four of them, I guess. And we'll start off with Tsarukyan and Makhachev. And we'll talk about the striking first. Now, the striking of Islam Makhachev, I think the best place to start is in the fight with Charles Oliveira, which in my opinion was the first fight we really got to see Makhachev striking at a high level. He was out striking Charles Oliveira the entire fight, and this was impressive because Oliveira previously in his title run had shown good striking. He was, dropping the likes of Justin Gaethje. He finished Michael Chandler, and in this fight it was Makhachev, the guy who dropped Charles Oliveira, which led to the finish. So he was definitely outlanding Charles Oliveira in their fight. When he faced Dustin Poirier, who most would say is the best boxer at 155, or at least was one of the best boxers at the time of fighting him, again, he was, I'm not going to say he was necessarily outlanding Dustin Poirier, but he was doing really well on the feet. It wasn't like Poirier was dominating him. He was doing really well on the feet with Dustin Poirier. Landed a bunch of shots, making it a competitive fight on the feet. And then when he faced Volkanovski, who most would say even at the time was a top 5 striker in the UFC, he knocks him out unconscious in the first round, puts him to sleep, the first guy in the UFC to knock out Alexander Volkanovski, which again just displayed Makhachev's striking. And I know a lot of people like to use the argument that striking's only effective because of their takedown threat. Now, even though that's a valid argument, in this case it's not, because you can say the exact same thing about Arman Tsarukyan. And if we do go on to Tsarukyan and the stand-up of Tsarukyan, I think he mainly displayed it in the fight with Beneil Dariush. He faced Beneil Dariush, knocked him out within a couple, well, just over a minute I think it was, which was super impressive because Dariush, at the time, even though he had lost to Oliveira, was still in the mix of being a top contender. When he faced Charles Oliveira, Tsarukyan wasn't necessarily outlanding him. He definitely didn't do as good as Makhachev did on the feet, but he definitely looked athletic. His kicks looked pretty sharp in that fight. But again, he didn't really outland Oliveira the same way, or dominate Oliveira the same way that Makhachev did. But to be fair, he had 49-19 on significant strikes against Charles Oliveira. And previous to that, I mean, he's had a couple of moments throughout his career. I mean, he managed to knock out Giagos in his on his run to his title shot, but he hasn't really displayed massive striking throughout his career. So I'm going to say striking goes to Islam Makhachev. He's just displayed it at a higher level. He's displayed it a lot more often, looks a lot more technically better, and he's displayed it against much better opponents on the feet. He's got the knockout power, he's got the striking ability. Tsarukyan's definitely very athletic. He's got a good body kick. He's, he's a great kicker, but I can't really put him on the same level as Makhachev. And even if we compare both of their fights with Charles Oliveira, Makhachev was dropping Charles Oliveira, definitely outlanding Oliveira. Whereas Tsarukyan, I mean, apart from the occasional head kick and body kick, he wasn't really doing anything significant to Oliveira on the feet. So I'm definitely going to give striking to Makhachev in this situation. Then if we go on to wrestling, which is the main talk about this fight, because you've got the best wrestler at 155 versus the best wrestler at 155. A lot of people think this is going to be a pure wrestling match. I mean, if we talk about the wrestling of Islam Makhachev, I mean, it goes without saying, he's out-wrestled nearly every single one of his opponents. Up until his title shot against Charles Oliveira, everyone was getting pretty much mauled by Makhachev's wrestling. He did the same thing to Charles Oliveira, took him down, wasn't afraid of the jiu-jitsu, just controlled him with the wrestling. Did the same thing to Alexander Volkanovski in the first fight, didn't necessarily maul him, but definitely had success with the wrestling. And he did the same thing to Dustin Poirier in their fight, where he just took down Dustin Poirier and was winning most of the rounds because of that. He out-wrestles everyone. There isn't anyone who survives the wrestling of Makhachev, Not necessarily survives, but can basically go against the wrestling of Makhachev. Whenever he decides to take people down, 9 times out of 10, he's able to do that. And if we look at Arman Tsarukyan, same thing. I mean, he was out-wrestling most opponents up until his title shot with Islam Makhachev. If we look at his fight with Charles Oliveira, same as to Makhachev. He was racking up control time against Charles Oliveira. He was controlling him with the wrestling. When he faced Yoel Alvarez, he absolutely mauled Yoel Alvarez with the wrestling. That was such a dominant performance. And even if we go back to their first fight between Makhachev and Tsarukyan, it was fairly 50-50. Makhachev definitely had his moments with the wrestling. Tsarukyan definitely had his moments with the wrestling. I mean, it was a fairly 50-50 fight from a wrestling standpoint. So I'm going to say they're equal when it comes to wrestling. I know a lot of people like to say that Makhachev's the best wrestler in the UFC, but in this instance, you can't necessarily go out there and say that he's a better wrestler than Arman Tsarukyan, considering that Tsarukyan's done just as good on his come-up with the wrestling, and they fought before, and it was fairly 50-50. And if we move on to submission ability, how dangerous are they when they're actually wrestling? I mean, I think the best display of this with Islam Makhachev is against Charles Oliveira, who most people would describe as a submission monster. One of the best submission monsters in the UFC. I mean, the guy's got more submission wins than anyone else in history. And Makhachev goes out there and submits him. Makes the submission guy tap out. Submits Charles Oliveira, which no one can ever do. It's usually them getting submitted by Oliveira. Did the same thing to Dustin Poirier. Took down Dustin Poirier and eventually submitted him, made him tap and go to sleep in the same exchange. Did the same thing to Dan Hooker. Did the same thing to Drew Dober. Did the same thing to Thiago Moises, whose only submission loss in his entire career is to Islam Makhachev. He's got 12 career submissions. Makhachev, without a doubt, he's one of the scariest submission artists right now in the UFC. Not only has he got, S-tier wrestling, but he's also got submission ability to back that up. Now, when it comes to Arman Tsarukyan, he hasn't submitted anybody in the UFC. He's got 0 UFC submissions. And even if we go back to the fight with Oliveira, which is a mutual opponent between him and Islam, if anything, it was Oliveira putting Tsarukyan in the dangerous situations. There was at least 2 moments in that fight where I was convinced that Tsarukyan was going to get submitted by Charles Oliveira. He's only ever had 5 career submissions as well. So I think without a doubt, Makhachev's definitely the better submission guy. He's got more submissions in the UFC and outside the UFC. He submitted Charles Oliveira, whereas Tsarukyan nearly got submitted by Charles Oliveira. So, without a doubt, Makhachev's definitely got the submission. Then if we take a look at some attributes between the two of them, if we start off with chin, Makhachev, he's been through some dogfights. He went through a dogfight with Dustin Poirier where he didn't get dropped, he didn't get obviously knocked out. When he faced Charles Oliveira, not Charles Oliveira, when he faced Volkanovski, another dogfight. Now, he did get dropped in the 5th round with Volkanovski, but that was after a dogfight. And he has been knocked out before by Adriano Martin, so he's been put to sleep, which is his only career loss. And then if we look at Arman Tsarukyan, he's never really been in a dogfight to test his chin. He's never really been in a back-and-forth scrap like Islam Makhachev has. He's taken a massive illegal kick from Charles Oliveira, which he was able to survive. He got wobbled by Joaquim Silva, which is his only really sign of having a bad chin on the feet, and he's been knocked out before in the regional scene. So for that reason, I've got to give it to Makhachev. He's been in a lot more dogfights. He's had his chin tested. He's faced way better strikers. I mean, Tsarukyan hasn't really faced a striker yet in his MMA career, whereas Islam's been facing pretty much only strikers. So Makhachev, I'm definitely going to have to give him the chin in this instance just because he's displayed a better chin more. Then high-level experience, which in my opinion would be ranked opponents. I'm going to class high-level experience as ranked opponents. Makhachev, he's faced Charles Oliveira, who was the champion, destroying everyone. He beat pound for pound Alexander Volkanovski twice. He beat an absolute legend in Dustin Poirier. And he beat Dan Hooker. And he beat Bobby Green. And he beat Thiago Moises, which are all his ranked wins. If we look at Arman Tsarukyan, he's beaten Charles Oliveira when Oliveira was still a top contender. He beat Benil Dariush coming off a loss. And he beat Yoel Alvarez. Those are his only wins. He also fought Gamrot, which I guess is still experienced, but he ended up losing that fight, even though it was very close and controversial, and some people thought Tsarukyan should have won that fight. But experience, without a doubt, goes to Islam Makhachev. Nothing, I mean, experience isn't necessarily significant at this level because it's not like the champion always beats the challenger, but Islam definitely gets the experience. And then for stamina, I'd say Arman Tsarukyan probably operates at a higher pace than Islam Makhachev, but if we look at Makhachev's stamina himself, I mean, he went 5 rounds with Dustin Poirier, he went 5 rounds with Alexander Volkanovski. Now, even though he does tend to slow down, he lost that 5th round against Volkanovski, nearly got finished. He definitely looked a lot slower in that 5th round with Dustin Poirier. Tsarukyan doesn't have the best stamina either. Not that he's got bad stamina, but he was definitely losing that 4th round to Gamrot. Gamrot was definitely winning the later rounds against Arman Tsarukyan. I mean, if you look back at their first fight between Islam Makhachev and Arman Tsarukyan, it was Islam winning the later rounds, or the 3rd round with the wrestling, and Tsarukyan looked a bit gassed out. So again, I'm going to have to give stamina to Islam Makhachev in this situation based off what I've seen. So if we compare everything between the two of them, I'm going to give striking, experience, stamina, chin, and submission ability to Islam Makhachev. I think he's displayed those at a better and a higher level than Arman Tsarukyan. I'm going to say wrestling's fairly 50-50. I can't sit here and confidently say that Makhachev's a better wrestler than Tsarukyan. I can't say that Tsarukyan's a better wrestler than Makhachev. And unfortunately, I can't really give anything in favor of Tsarukyan just yet. But again, we'll have to see. And then if we go into the co-main event between Morab and Umar and Merab and do the exact same thing, if we look at the striking of Morab, Morab's got terrible stand-up. He's not really a good striker. I mean, every single one of his wins are by decision, apart from one, which was ground and pound against Moraes. And in that fight with Moraes, he nearly got finished himself in that fight, but he got dropped by Moraes, nearly finished. And then it wasn't even like he used striking to win. He used ground and pound, so even that wasn't really a fight on the feet. And he has been facing non-stop strikers, to be fair. But even when he faced Henry Cejudo, who's predominantly a wrestler, was able to crack and nearly wobble Morab on the feet as well. He's got decent striking to set up takedowns. He's had moments on the feet before, but he's not really a good striker as Morab. Now, if you look at Umar and Merab, he's got amazing stand-up as Umar. He's knocked people out cold in the UFC before. He's got a really good front kick to the face. He uses his kicks to an advantage. He's got really good kicks. And if you look at his fight with Corey Sandhagen, who most would say is a highly decorated striker, similar to Makhachev against Poirier, I'm not going to say that Umar was dominating the fight on the feet, but he was definitely landing on the feet. He was having his moments on the feet against Corey Sandhagen. It wasn't like he just had to take him down to win. He had his moments on the feet with Sandhagen. And again, you can use the excuse that the takedown threat is the only reason why it worked, but you can use the same excuse against Morab because he's another pressure wrestler. So Umar, I'd honestly say that Umar is probably one of the best strikers in the bantamweight division. That might be a bit of an absurd statement, but if you take away maybe Sean O'Malley, Sandhagen, and Peter Yan, who is genuinely like a better striker from like a technical standpoint than Umar Nurmagomedov? I mean, are we talking about the likes of Marlon Vera, Song Yadong? I'm going to say that Umar's definitely a top 5 striker in the division. So striking is definitely going to go to Umar Nurmagomedov. In fact, that's where I think he's going to win this fight. He's displayed it a lot more times. He's not afraid to fight on the feet. He's displayed knockout power and technique before, so striking is definitely going to go to Umar Nurmagomedov. And then if we look at the wrestling, again, a fight between 2 wrestlers. Merab, very good wrestler. I mean, he's competed in Sambo before, which was his discipline before MMA. And I think the PT Yan fight is the perfect place to start when it comes to wrestling. PT Yan's known for being a decent wrestler. I'm not saying he's a heavy wrestler, but he's a decent wrestler. Merab was setting records on PT Yan. He ended up setting a record in that fight. He dominated PT Yan. I don't know the amount of takedowns per round, but he was just constant takedown after takedown after takedown from round 1 to round 5. Absolutely mauled PT Yan, one of the most dominating performances in history. And then when he faces Henry Cejudo, who I mean, he's an Olympic wrestler, is Cejudo. Same thing, was beating Cejudo with the wrestling, made it look easy, started picking up and carrying around the octagon like he was a kid in that fight. When he faced Sean O'Malley, who most would say he's got amazing takedown defense, probably the best takedown defense in the bantamweight division, the same thing, took down O'Malley, controlled him for the majority of the fight, which ended up winning him the belt. Merab is a phenomenal wrestler, one of the best in the UFC right now. His wrestling has got him where he is, and unlike Umar Nurmagomedov, he doesn't have to rely on striking when he can't take people down because his takedown offense is that good. All he needs is wrestling at this level. And then if we look at Umar Nurmagomedov, again, very good wrestler, used his wrestling so far in his career, even though he's not really had a long career in the UFC. If you look at his fight with Corey Sandhagen, who is a good wrestler, I know he's predominantly a striker, and this is a striker versus grappler matchup. Sandhagen has displayed a good wrestling before against Marlon Vera and Rob Font. Umar took down Sandhagen a lot of the time. Sandhagen did have good takedown defense, but again, the thing that really put the nail on the stamp for this in this situation was Nurmagomedov taking down Sandhagen. And one thing I really like about Umar is his ability to blend his striking with his wrestling. Merab's more of a constant takedown type of guy. He just wants to shoot takedown after takedown, whereas Umar, he likes to blend the striking in with the takedown. He likes to hit you with a shot or fake a shot up top, and then immediately as you react to that, shoot a takedown. I think he's probably got some of the best mixing up with the wrestling and the striking in the UFC, but I'm going to give wrestling an equals just like Tsarukyan and Makhachev. I think it's equal between the two of them. I can't say that Nurmagomedov is a better wrestler than Merab. I can't say that Merab is a better wrestler than Nurmagomedov. The only way to find out is, well, this weekend. And then for submission ability, Merab, he's got no UFC submissions. In fact, he's actually suffered a UFC submission loss when he faced Ricky Simon and got put out unconscious. In his entire MMA career, he's only ever had 1 submission as well, which isn't that impressive. And the one guy he got a submission against already had 4 submission losses. And if we look at Umar Nurmagomedov, he's had 2 submissions in the UFC against Morozov and Kelleher, which is quite impressive, and he's got 7 career submissions overall, so automatically, even though neither of them are heavy submission artists, I've got to give submission ability to Umar Nurmagomedov. And then if we go through some attributes, when it comes to chin, I'd say Merab, I mean, he hasn't got a bad chin. I mean, like I said, he got wobbled by Henry Cejudo. Marias hurt him in that fight. I know this doesn't necessarily reflect chin, but even Sean O'Malley was able to hurt Merab in their fight in the 5th round. If you look at Umar Nurmagomedov, I mean, he got dropped by Begsat, but apart from that, he hasn't really displayed a bad chin. So for chin, I'm going to say it's fairly 50-50. Umar hasn't fought any of the big names that Merab has, so we can't really say that he's got a better chin. But at the same time, Merab hasn't displayed he's got like an extremely phenomenal chin either. If we look at high-level experience, Merab's faced Sean O'Malley, Henry Cejudo, PT Yan, Jose Aldo, Marlon Moraes, and John Dodson. Umar's faced Corey Sandhagen, and that's it. All he's faced is Corey Sandhagen, and I think experience is something that's really going to help Merab in this fight. He's faced so many different styles, so many different veterans, so many different guys in the UFC, whereas Umar Nurmagomedov, he's faced one guy in Sandhagen. So experience, without a doubt, is going to go to Merab, and I actually think that's Merab's biggest advantage in this fight with Umar. If we go to stamina, I think Merab's probably got the best stamina in the UFC. Again, I'm going to go back to that fight with PT Yan, which in my opinion perfectly displays the stamina. I mean, from round 1, he was dominating with the wrestling. In the 5th round, even after round 1, again, the same thing, dominating PT Yan with the wrestling, takedown after takedown. He doesn't slow down. 47 takedown attempts in one fight with 418 attempted strikes is crazy. And if you compare the stats between Merab and Sean O'Malley and PT Yan and Sandhagen, Merab, from a stamina perspective, definitely showed more impressive stamina. Every single fight he operates at such a high pace, whether it be him with his volume striking or volume wrestling, he operates at a high pace. And in terms of Umar Nurmagomedov, he doesn't really operate at the same pace as Merab. He likes to keep people on the ground. He's more of a control time type of guy. He is quite quick and flashy on the feet. He hasn't displayed that he's got bad stamina, but they're two completely different guys. Merab's a volume wrestler, Umar's a control wrestler. Merab likes to take you down and then let you back up, and then take you down and let you back up and take you down and let you back up. Umar, when he gets the takedown, he wants to keep you up and rack up the control time or find a finish. Or they're completely different guys, but I'm going to have to give Morab stamina. He's got some of the best in the UFC. So if we look at the experience and stamina, I'm definitely going to have to give that to Morab. I think those are his biggest advantages. He's got the stamina and he's got the experience. I'd say wrestling and chin is fairly give or take between the two of them. And then I give Umar the advantage when it comes to striking game and submission game between Morab and Umar Nurmagomedov. But that is my skills breakdown of the co-main in the main event at UFC 311. Let me know your thoughts on if you agree with this and who you personally think is going to win this fight. Thank you for watching.